Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for this lecture on domestic and international arbitration. This lecture series has been organized by Prudentia and Partners, LIKE, Legal Information Knowledge and Expression, in association with Center for Research in International and Comparative Law, MNLU Aurangabad. And LegitQuest is the knowledge partner, along with Legiti as the media partner. Prudentia and Partners, founded in 2016, is one of the fastest growing law firms in Delhi, equipped with a very versatile team of attorneys dedicated to provide best services in a wide range of legal services across sectors such as civil, criminal, matrimonial, electricity, telecom, environmental, banking, and commercial litigation. LIKE is an online one-stop solution for all the updates of the legal world, with a goal to provide a platform to other budding brightest legal minds and ignite the culture of debate and deliberations across the fraternity. MNLU is an institution established in the year 2017 with an objective of imparting quality legal education. LegitQuest is an artificial intelligence-based legal research product. It is a state-of-the-art legal research platform for conducting legal research and is very well known for the world's only one-click insight system called the iDraft Case Analytics. In short, the iDraft feature powered by artificial intelligence takes out the issue, facts, arguments, reasoning, and decision of a case law. LegitQuest has also recently started with LegitI, which has the latest news, interviews, and columns and serves the stakeholders of judiciary. Now, moving forward, our today's topic is Scheme of the Arbitration and Conciliation Act 1996. And I'm deeply honored to have Mr. Eshwari Vikram as our esteemed speaker today. Mr. Vikram practices in the field of land acquisition, arbitration, intellectual property rights, insolvency and bankruptcy law, service law, law against sexual harassment, consumer protection law, and real estate law. His fora of practice include the Supreme Court of India, Delhi High Court, district courts in Delhi, NCLT, NCLAT, NCDRC. In the past, he has been in association with Shadur Amarchal Mangadas, wherein he was working in the litigation team, dealing with privacy laws, arbitration, and insolvency laws. He's currently working with Mr. Amit Sibal, senior advocate, and has assisted him in a wide variety of matters. Along with his professional commitments, he has a keen interest in academics. He has various publications in reputed journals such as Niti Aayog Journal of Law and Policy and International Journal of Commerce and Social Sciences. At present, he is also editor and on the advisory board of two reputed journals on law and policy and transnational commercial laws. So before we start, let me brief you all that our today's session will be for 45 minutes, followed by Q&A. I would humbly request all our participants to please be on mute and without video throughout the call. And all questions to the speaker can be written in the chat box, which will be taken at the end of the session if the time permits. So I think we seem to be all set. I'll now hand over it to Mr. Vikram now. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Shahar, for that elaborate introduction. Thank you so much for coordinating the event also. Now, let's start with the topic today, that is the Scheme of the Arbitration Act. If you can just upload the slideshow that I have prepared.
Yes, sir, just a second, sir.
So today we are going to discuss the Scheme of the Arbitration Act. Now, we are not going to go deep into the various concepts that are there. We are not going to take into consideration all the sections of the Arbitration Act because it would be nearly impossible to do that in an hour. But what we are going to focus upon is the key concepts that are there in the Arbitration Act. Now, the understanding of these particular key concepts will help you understand the basic premise why those particular sections are provided under the Arbitration Act and will give you a deeper understanding of the same. So let's start with the first slide. You can just skip and go to the next slide. Yeah. So as I have already told you, we are just going to discuss what is arbitration all about. Now, the definition of arbitration is that it is an alternative dispute redressal mechanism between two agreeable parties. Mark all the letters that are in, all the words that are in, that are provided. Between two agreeable parties having entered into a written arbitration agreement competent to contract to appoint an arbitrator or arbitrators to give a binding decision on an arbitrable dispute. Now, the first question arises is that what is alternative dispute resolution mechanism? Now, it generally means that any mechanism which provides for settlement of dispute outside the court is known as alternative dispute redressal mechanism. It may be in form of negotiation, it may be in form of mediation, and it may also be in form of arbitration. But there's some aspects of arbitration which keeps it apart from mediation and negotiation. As you know, that mediation and negotiation may not be binding till a particular parties to that particular mediation or negotiation table enter into a written contract and sign the same. But in arbitration, if you have an agreement to refer the disputes to an arbitrator and ultimately the decision comes in form of an award, then that particular award is binding upon you. There is no if, but, or what for that particular purpose. Second difference is that in mediation, it's usually a mediator who can only ask you certain things, who can help you solve the dispute. But in arbitration, it is like a court wherein pleadings will be filed, documents will be submitted, and decision will be made. Whereas in negotiation, there is nothing like this. Negotiation table does not require a mediator altogether. It requires just two parties willing to solve their disputes. Therefore, it is a form of alternative dispute redressal mechanism, but is empowered by law to enforce what comes as a decision. Now, that is one. The second thing is, was arbitration in existence before it was recognized by national laws, or is it a gift that has been given to us by national laws? Meaning thereby, did the chicken come first or the egg? Now, let's take few opinion as well as few historical facts in order to appreciate this particular aspect. Learned author Martin Hunter in his book writes and traces the history of arbitration in England. He points out that earlier noblemen used to refer their disputes to a third party, and that third party used to decide their disputes. Same was a practice that was prevalent in France. These parties used to accept whatever decision was given by the third party because that party was a nobleman, and out of their nobility and fear not to disgrace him, they used to accept it. In India also, various Indian authors point out that arbitration in the crude sense was available at village level, specifically in panchayats, which was conducted by the village, wherein people used to approach the panchayat, tell their dispute, and whatever decision was given by the panchayat was binding upon them, not legally, but out of social pressure that was prevalent. Similarly, there are other countries wherein arbitration in practice has been seen before the laws were enacted to enforce the awards that was passed by the arbitrator. But why is recognition important? Why should arbitration be recognized by law? Why now the countries have recognized arbitration? The reason is that social pressure cannot work all the time. People who dominate the society may think that they are not bound by the decision that is made by the arbitrator, and hence why to follow it. In order to avoid such type of situation, it was thought fit by the legislature that a means of private dispute redressal mechanism should be provided under law itself so that it may have legal force. This, in return, brings a sense of stability, it brings a sense of impartiality, transparency, and legal force of the system. And that is why various countries now have recognized arbitration as a means of alternative dispute redressal mechanism. Now, as you know, the word arbitrator is basically a person who has arbitrary powers. So in order to stop the exercise of arbitrary powers also, so that the powers can be exercised in a fashion that is known to law, there were various restrictions that was imposed by these national laws on the power of the arbitrators, which we will discuss in the later part of the discussion today or tomorrow. Now, this is what is alternative dispute redressal mechanism. So we shouldn't go which came first. It's like a chicken and an egg situation, but we shouldn't waste much more time because now it has become an academic exercise. Reason being that most of the countries recognize arbitration as a form of dispute resolution mechanism. Now let's come to the second aspect. The second aspect is parties must agree. meaning thereby that parties have to agree to go for arbitration. If there is no arbitration agreement, the parties have not agreed for an arbitration agreement, no parties can be compelled to go for arbitration. The reason is that people expect that their disputes may be resolved by public forum, which is in form of courts. They have trust in courts. They don't want to be compelled to enter into a private arrangement in form of arbitration when they have not consented to the same. The third aspect is that the arbitration agreement has to be in writing. Now, why is this a requirement of arbitration agreement to be in writing provided under law? The reason is that arbitrations are serious because it excludes the exercise of jurisdiction by courts. Parties can only refer their disputes to an arbitrator. Parties can agitate their point only before the arbitrators, and the award that is given is binding upon them. Therefore, in order to bring stability, in order to ensure and bring strictness to the system, it is specifically provided under the Arbitration Act as well as under the New York Convention and UNCITRAL model law that the arbitration agreements needs to be in writing. But before we come down to written arbitration agreements, let's venture more upon parties must agree. Now, what does this mean? Parties may agree. Yes, they have a document before them. They have signed it. They may have agreed to it. Very easy, simple, doesn't require much adjudication. But there are cases when what happens is that supposedly there is a detailed contract which provides all the clauses and agreements to it. And then there's a second agreement that is entered by the party, which does not have an arbitration clause, but has a reference to the first contract. Now, the question arises whether the second contract and the disputes arising in the second contract can be referred to arbitration. This was one of the disputes that arose before the Supreme Court in MR Engineering Construction Private Limited versus Somdutt Builders Limited. I'll give you the citation. It's 2009, 9th scale 298. Now, this is an interesting case because the first agreement consisted of an arbitration clause, whereas the second agreement entered by the parties did not have an arbitration clause, but only had a reference to the first agreement. To this, the court said that acceptance of arbitration agreement or acceptance of the procedure of arbitration has to be a conscious acceptance, meaning thereby that the parties must know that if a dispute arises in the future, it will be referred to arbitration. Therefore, it has to be a conscious acceptance by the parties. And if the second contract wants the arbitration to be applicable, it has to specifically mention this particular fact. However, this particular approach has seen a small shift, or you may say it is an exception that now the courts have drawn recently. I think it was a 2018 case, that is Inox Wind Limited versus Thermo Cables Limited. Now, the facts of this case were also interesting. There was a standard form of contract which was there provided and was entered by the parties, and there were certain purchase orders that were made. Now, the purchase order did not have the arbitration clause, but it merely said that the terms and reference of the standard form of contract will be applicable on these purchase orders. The question was whether the parties have agreed for the disputes to be referred to arbitration for these purchase orders. Now, the court to this said that in case of standard form of contracts which are entered by parties who are professionals or trade associations, if the purchase order has a reference to that standard form of contract, then the disputes will be referred to arbitration. However, not going into the facts of the case, because the facts of the case were very peculiar and the reasoning so given was also very peculiar. But this also somewhat leads to an absurd situation. For example, you buy a particular product from Amazon, let's say. Now, or any e-commerce website. I don't want to target any website in particular. Now, you don't enter into agreement as such. You get the product, you get the delivery, and in the delivery receipt, it's written that all terms and conditions of the standard terms and conditions provided in the websites will apply. You are not expected to read that, because that's just a delivery receipt. You're not expected to know that there's an arbitration agreement also in the standard terms and conditions, because you have never seen it, nor it was displayed to you when you place the order. The question will be whether will you be bound by an arbitration procedure provided under the standard terms and agreement. This seems to be a little absurd situation, though I'm not commenting anything on the Inox Wind Limited judgment, because that was well within the facts that was a part of that case. But in general, I find this particular proposition to be a little absurd. And I think that MR Engineering and Construction was a much better law, that there should be a specific reference in the second agreement or in the supplementary agreement regarding arbitration. Now, then we come to another aspect regarding parties must agree. Now, as you know, and as I've told, that Section 7 specifically requires the parties to agree to arbitration. The question will be then, can third parties be bound by the arbitration agreement who are not signatory to the arbitration agreement? The answer was first given in Dow Chemicals versus Isover St. Gobain. It was, I think it was the ICC award that was passed by the ICC tribunal. And in this case, what happened is that Dow Chemicals company was the parent company, and it had various subsidiaries which entered into various third agreements with various other people. One such company was Isover. Now, there was a particular dispute that arose. Disputes were referred to arbitration. Dow Chemical referred the disputes to arbitration, and an arbitral tribunal was established. Now, Isover, who was a respondent, raised a contention that Dow Chemicals, being a parent company and not being a party to that arbitration agreement, which is entered between the subsidiaries and Isover, Dow Chemicals cannot initiate action, number one, cannot raise their own disputes or own losses that have been caused to them. Now, to this, the ICC said that it is correct that third parties are not bound by the arbitration agreement, and mere corporate ties between companies is not sufficient to bind them. But if in the performance of the agreement, if in the conclusion, performance and termination of the contracts, the parent company was a party and it was the intention to bind the parent company, then in that case, the third party who is not a signatory to the arbitration will also be bound by the arbitration agreement. So this is like well known as a doctrine of group of companies. This doctrine has now been applied in Indian law. There are various cases you will find in this aspect, specifically Amit Chand Shah, Chlorocontrol, Charan Properties, all are on these particular aspects. The courts, now these all particular cases, don't worry, we will be discussing in the lecture tomorrow, which will be more on Section 7. But for the present purpose, I have just discussed to show what is the meaning of parties must agree. Secondly, what is the meaning of the word agreement? Is it to be conscious or not? And thirdly, whether non-signatories to an arbitration agreement can be bound by an arbitration agreement. So for this limited purpose, I have pointed you these particular concepts. Otherwise, we will be discussing it tomorrow. The third thing is written arbitration agreement. Now, as you all know, that arbitration agreement has to be in writing. That is provided by Section 7 of the Arbitration Act, Article 2, Subclause 2 of the New York Convention, and Article 7 of the UNCITRAL Model Law. Now, I'll pause for a second here, and I'll tell you that UNCITRAL Model Law is a model law that is prepared by the United Nations, which the parties who are signatory to it take into consideration while drafting their domestic arbitration acts for enforcement of domestic awards or for enforcement of foreign awards. So all these particular things provide for a written arbitration agreements. You may think why the requirement of written is provided. So I have told you earlier that written is just to bring seriousness in the process, so that parties who have written an arbitration agreement who have consented to arbitration agreement are only required to go for arbitration. Now, there are a few interesting cases which has happened on this particular written arbitration aspect. The first one is Municipal Corporation of Greater Mumbai versus Pratibha Industries Limited. What happened is that it's a very recent case. What happened is that there was a tender notice which contained a clause providing that no arbitration will take place. So it was against arbitration. The tender notice clearly provided it. Disputes arose between the parties. One of the parties went before the High Court under Section 9 of the Arbitration Act. Now, the High Court, single judge, granted stay on that particular notice invoking the notice terminating the tender notice. Now, as the single judge granted the stay, the second party appeared. They also consented to arbitration, though there was no arbitration agreement in writing, but they consented to an arbitration and asked the judge to refer the dispute to a sole arbitrator who was a retired, I think it was a retired High Court judge. Now, later, the Municipal Corporation of Greater Mumbai realized that there was no arbitration agreement. How can the matter be referred to arbitration? They filed an application for recall of that order before the single judge. The single judge allowed it, saying that there is no arbitration agreement. I can't compel the parties to go for arbitration when the requisites of Section 7 are not fulfilled. To this, there was an appeal that was filed before the DB. The DB said that because Arbitration Act is a complete code and there's no procedure for recall of the order, hence the order cannot be recalled. Now, on this rose an interesting issue before the Supreme Court when it was taken now before the Supreme Court. So the parties made twofold submissions. The first submission that they made is that Arbitration Act being a complete code, High Courts can't recall their order appointing an arbitrator if passed, because that's order a Section 11 order, which there's no procedure to recall it. The court said that no, power to recall is an inherent power of the court, and therefore the court can recall such order if passed by mistake. But the second issue which was involved in this case was far more interesting. One of the arguments raised was that even though there is no arbitration agreement in the tender notice and the tender notice is against arbitration, but we have agreed for arbitration before the single judge. And it is only in that pursuance that an order was passed appointing an arbitrator. And that particular order, along with our oral consent, will become an arbitration agreement. To this, the court said no. Section 7 specifically requires an arbitration agreement to be in writing. Yes, it may so happen that it is not signed, but it has to be in writing. And a statement made during the hearing of a case, even if recorded in the court order, until and unless not shown, not signed by the parties, cannot be a written arbitration agreement. Now, this shows the importance why the arbitration agreement has to be in writing. Similarly, there's another case of 2018 by Justice R. Bhanumati of the Supreme Court, that is Kerala State Electricity Board versus Kurlin. Now, the facts of this case are also very peculiar, but I'm not going to go into the facts. The legal principle is more important. In this, the court said that parties cannot be referred to arbitration merely because and based on the statements made by their respective counsels. The parties have to draw agreement. The parties have to jointly file an agreement before the court if they want their disputes to be referred to an arbitration. Similar observation was made by the court in Efcon Industries versus Sharon. It is a 2010 case. It was given by Justice R.V. Ravindran, wherein the court said that even under Section 89 of the Code of Civil Procedure, if you may recall, that is providing for settlement of disputes outside the court, and the courts can refer to the parties for mediation, negotiation, as well as arbitration under Section 89. The parties can be referred to arbitration under Section 89, but there has to be a joint memo filed by the parties. There has to be a joint application to be filed by the parties, or a joint affidavit that has to be signed by the parties and then can only they be referred to arbitration. So these all cases show why having an arbitration agreement is writing is important, and what is the approach of the court towards Section 7 of the Arbitration Act. The last case which I'll be referring to, it's a very small case and a very interesting one also, that was given by Justice Pratibha Singh very recently in 2018. That was Motherboon Food Industries versus Mindscrap One Marketing Limited. Now, in this case, what happened is that there was an agreement entered for packaging and manufacturing of breads. Dispute arose between the parties. Matter was referred to an arbitration tribunal. The agreement provided for constitution of one member arbitral tribunal, meaning thereby that there has to be one arbitrator. Interestingly, one of the parties referred it to a three-member arbitral tribunal. The other side objected to it. The arbitral tribunal waived that particular objection, said that no, that objection has no substance, passed an award. The award was later challenged before the court. Now, the court said that when the arbitration agreement specifically provided that there has to be just one arbitrator, appointment of three arbitrators was not only against the agreement, but also against the principle of equal treatment of parties when the other party has raised a specific objection to the constitution of that particular arbitral tribunal. The court said that when something is in writing, that cannot be superseded by oral agreement. And as there was no evidence which could support that the other party agreed for three-member arbitral tribunal, therefore the court said that even the award that is passed by the arbitral tribunal is against the arbitration agreement, and hence dismissed turned the award that was passed. Now, see the amount of time that was wasted in that particular arbitration proceeding, and on one not technical, but fundamental flaw, that it was not in term of the agreement, that the whole award that was passed was set aside. This shows the relevance of an arbitration agreement to be in writing, and also that the party should adhere to the written arbitration agreement. Now, let's come to competent to contract aspect. Now, as you all know, that arbitration agreement is no different from any other ordinary contract. Arbitration agreement is merely to compel the parties to come together and to send their disputes to the arbitral tribunal for a decision. Therefore, it is also a form of contract, and hence sections that are provided under the Contract Act, specifically section 10, 11 and 12, which provide for competence of a party, such as the age restriction or a person who is lunatic. Such type of concepts under the Contract Act will also apply in the Arbitration Act. The fourth thing is, I think it's the fifth, is appointment of an arbitrator. Now, as I have told you earlier, in mediation as well as negotiations, there's no requirement for appointment of an arbitrator. Mediation it's not the arbitrator who's appointed but a person who usually takes into consideration your issues and tries to convince you to enter into a settlement, but he cannot enforce you. But arbitrator is authority acting and having all powers which are very similar to a court. Then comes the second last aspect, that is binding decision. Now, supposedly there's an agreement that you entered, and that agreement does not provide, or it says that parties have referred their disputes to arbitration. Any award so passed will not be binding on the parties, and the parties may at a later point of time agitate the same disputes before a court of law, means a civil court. What do you think? Whether it will be arbitration? The answer to this is that no, it won't be an arbitration, because one of the mandates of arbitration is that the party should consent to be bound by that particular award that is passed by the arbitrator. And hence, such type of agreement will not fulfill the ingredients of Section 7 of the Arbitration Act. The last thing, and this is the most important thing, that is arbitral disputes. Now, as you all know, that that there is a difference between arbitral dispute and non-arbitrable dispute. It may be that there is a civil dispute, but it may be non-arbitrable, or it may be that it's a criminal dispute and still it's non-arbitrable. But why are these specific disputes in civil law and most of the disputes in criminal law taken out of the Arbitration Act? The answer is there in the concept. The concept is that arbitration is a form of private dispute redressal mechanism. And therefore, the arbitrators and the parties are only bound, meaning thereby whatever award is given by the arbitrator, it is only the parties that are bound by it. It is a right in personam, not a right in rem. It can bound the whole world by the award. And therefore, there being a difference between the concept of right in rem and right in personam, right in rem or rights which are in form of right in rem are not arbitrable, whereas disputes which are in form of right in personam are arbitrable. Now I'll just quickly wrap up this particular part because this is just an introduction session here. I won't be going too deep into it. We will be discussing this particular aspect, arbitral dispute, in the second lecture that we'll be having tomorrow. But for the time being, I'll tell you what type of disputes are non-arbitrable. So disputes relating to rights and liabilities which arise from criminal offenses, non-arbitrable. Matrimonial disputes relating to divorce, judicial separation, restitution of conjugal rights, rights of child custody, then guardianship matters, then insolvency and winding up matters, then testamentary matters, eviction or tenancy matters governed by special statutes are non-arbitrable. The reason is that it is not only a right in personam, but right in rem. The second reason is also that, for example, the eviction or tenancy matters governed by special statutes are statutes which provides protection against eviction. And therefore, they are governed by special law, and also there's a special tribunal which will decide these disputes. And in view of this, and because of this, these particular disputes are non-arbitrable. Now, in addition to this, there are certain other judgments which have added to the list of non-arbitrable disputes. One was Sri Vimal Kishore Shah versus, I think it was Jagyesh Dinesh Shah, when the Supreme Court said that disputes relating to trusts are also non-arbitrable. Now, there's a reason to that. If you know the concept of trust, trust is made by the owner of that particular property. Means owner is the founder of the trust. He creates a trust, and under him, the obligation of ownership of that particular property, he gives it to trustees. Trustees may not be a party to the trust deed, nor will be the beneficiaries parties to the trustee. Therefore, if these trustees and beneficiaries and people at large are not party to that trust agreement, how can then the disputes be referred to arbitration? It is precisely because of this reason that disputes relating to trust are also held to be non-arbitrable disputes. Then there may be situations wherein there's a specialized forum that is created by statute, for example, for recovery of debts by banks, disputes under the Electricity Act, service law, labor law, or military law, for which there are specific bodies created. Such type of disputes are also non-arbitrable. It was held in a 1996 case by the Supreme Court in the case of Punjab State Electricity Board versus Guru Nanak Cold Storage. Now, next slide, please.
So just a second.
Yeah, take your time, no worries.
So is it?
Okay, now you can just place up the slide, but I'll continue with the lecture. Now, arbitration basically is of two types, or it has two forms, to be honest. One is institutional arbitration, second is ad hoc arbitration. Now, yeah, the slide is here now. Now, in institutional arbitration, there are specific institutes that govern the arbitrators, that govern the arbitration proceeding. For example, international institutes such as SIAC, Singapore International Arbitration Council, or ICC, or LSAC, LIAC, are various form of dispute resolution institutions which specializes in arbitrations. What is the what is the benefit of having such an institutional arbitration is that number one, everything is very organized. Number two, that they have their own panel of arbitrators from which you can select. These arbitrators are not only jurists or legal personals, but they are also technical arbitrators who can provide technical feedbacks or technical viewpoint on a particular arbitration dispute. So if a particular party, if a particular dispute relates to construction contracts, then the parties will prefer an expert in construction law or construction practices. So all these people are on their panel, and therefore they can easily select one of the arbitrators who has requisite qualifications. Therefore, institutional arbitration is now increasing, not in India or not in the whole world, but also in India, in domestic level also. And that's why if you will see that there are more than 23 institutional arbitrations, arbitration institutes in India. One is the Mumbai Center for International Arbitration, the Delhi Center for International Arbitration. And this is in consonance with the world practice that is going on. People, in order to attract investments, want a resolution mechanism which is quick, which is efficient, which is easy, which is manageable, which has experts on its panel. And that is why even countries like India, wherein ad hoc was prevalent, now is having a paradigm shift and moving towards institutional arbitrations. Second is, as I have told you earlier, this is ad hoc arbitration. Now, this is where the parties can appoint anyone as an arbitrator, and it is the arbitrator who decides the rules and all. For example, in SIAC, LCIA, ICC, they have their own set of rules which regulates how the arbitration proceeding will be conducted. But in ad hoc arbitration, there is no such rules. Two parties can come together. They can agree to appoint an arbitrator. The arbitrator will be appointed. It can be a single-member arbitral tribunal, 3-member arbitral tribunal, or even you can appoint 9-member arbitral tribunal if you want. The numbers can go on and on. As much as your paying capacity is, you can appoint arbitrators. The only short restriction that is provided under Section 10 is that it should not be even number of arbitrators. It has always to be odd. That is the only restriction. So all these arbitrators that are appointed, they decide what procedure they will apply. Number one. Number two, it may happen that particular arbitrator is not expert in that field. It may happen that your requirement is to have a technical arbitrator. That is why ad hoc arbitration is good. It is prevalent now, and it depends upon the party's wish whether they want to go for ad hoc arbitration or institutional arbitration. Next slide, please. Yeah. So, see, we have discussed a lot about what is arbitration, what are the form of arbitration, institutional arbitration, as well as ad hoc arbitration, what are the requirements of arbitration, why arbitration is fashioned in this sense. But now let's concentrate upon the Arbitration and Conciliation Act 1996. As you all know, if you read Section 80, if I'm not wrong, of the Arbitration and Conciliation Act, that repeals three enactments, three prior enactments. That is the Arbitration Act 1940, the Arbitration Protocol and Convention Act 1937, the Foreign Awards Recognition and Enforcement Act 1961. these three enactments are repealed by the Arbitration and Conciliation Act 1996. Why is the question? Because the Arbitration Act 1940 was a separate enactment for enforcement of domestic awards. Domestic awards means awards that are passed in India, having a seat of arbitration in India, and the parties who are attached to that particular seats is also Indian parties, right? So that provided for domestic awards under the Arbitration Act 1940, which is now provided under the 1996 Act as Part 1 of the Arbitration Act. The second was Arbitration Protocol and Convention Act 1937. This provided for enforcement of awards under the Geneva Convention. And therefore, this is provided by Section 2, by Part 3, I suppose, of the Arbitration Act 1996. And therefore, this is also provided. The third is Foreign Award Recognition and Enforcement Act 1961, which provided for enforcement of foreign awards that are passed under the New York Convention. As now this is also provided under the Arbitration Act, therefore this was also repealed. What does it show? It shows that Arbitration and Conciliation Act 1996 is not something new. It is an amalgamation of these three separate acts which have been consolidated in one. That is the first point that I've made. The second point that I've made is that not all provisions that are provided under the Arbitration Conciliation Act 1996 are similar to these earlier three enactments, meaning thereby there were a lot of changes that were made. Now, if you read the preamble of the Arbitration Conciliation Act 1996, you'll realize that these changes were made and this law is in consonance and, to be honest, to some extent a replica of UNCITRAL model law, the founding law which has been adopted by various countries in their state-made arbitration acts. Therefore, in order to be consistent with the international practices, this law is passed. Now, there have been various amendments that have happened in this law, 2015, 2019. There are various amendments which we will be discussing later, but the intention is to bring more and more foreign investment, to make India a zone wherein arbitration is smooth, where people can agree and know how much time it's going to take for a dispute to be decided by arbitration. Therefore, to bring efficiency, transparency, stability into the system, various amendments are made to the Arbitration Conciliation Act 1996 in order to highlight this. There are few amendments that were struck down by the Supreme Court, specifically the amendment made to Section 36 of the Arbitration Act, which overturned BCCI versus Kochi, which we'll be discussing later. But if you read the purpose of these enactments as well as the amendments that are brought, the basic feature is that they are brought in order to make it sound, safe for investment in India and for resolution of disputes regarding those investments. Now, the Arbitration Act is divided into two parts, Part A and Part 1 and Part 2. Now, foreign awards is different. Foreign award is where the seat of arbitration is outside India. Now, what is seat, what is venue, we'll be covering in the next slide. But for the time being, just understand that seat of arbitration is outside India, and the award can be enforced through the New York Convention or through the Geneva Convention award. The second, that is the first, that is Part 1 awards, that is also split into two parts, that is domestic arbitration and international commercial arbitration. There's no much of a difference, but I'll tell you that there's a specific clause which says that international commercial arbitrations are those wherein at least one party is a foreign party, meaning thereby that one is an Indian party and one is a foreign party, right? Now, if one party is outside India, resident outside India, incorporated outside India, managed or controlled outside India, then that is international commercial arbitration. But if both the parties are Indian parties, then it is domestic arbitration. So this is the basic scheme of the Arbitration Act 1996. We'll be going into detail in the subsequent slides. Next slide, please. Now, this thing is very important. That is arbitration agreement. What is the forms of arbitration agreement that are there and recognized under law? The first is arbitration clause. It can be that the arbitration agreement is not in a form of a separate agreement, but in a contract, there's a particular clause, that is the arbitration clause. To be honest, learned author Martin Hunter comments that arbitration clause, he sometimes refers it to as the midnight clause, because this is generally the last clause that is added to the arbitration agreement. That is added to the contract. So this arbitration clause is a clause that is found in a contract that refers the disputes to arbitration in case a dispute arises in the future. Now remember, arbitration clause and separate arbitration agreement usually direct towards the future. They anticipate that if in future a dispute arises, then the matter will be referred to arbitration. On the contrary, submission agreement is when the dispute has already taken place and now you want to refer the dispute to arbitration. That is submission agreement. Right? Now, the difference between the three is clear, but is there any difference? In the eye of law, there is none. In practice, yes. Arbitration clauses, separate arbitration agreements are, to be honest, sometimes vague, sometimes have a very expansive ambit, and therefore they can be interpreted in any manner, and they are made in such a fashion because no one can anticipate sitting today as to what will be the dispute in the future. Whereas submission agreement are quite detailed. They detail the facts, they detail what is to be referred to the arbitration, what will be the award of the arbitration, what will be considered by the arbitral tribunal. All this is provided in the submission agreement. So practically there is a difference. Theoretically or legally speaking, there is none. Now, the second question is, what happens if the main contract is void? Now, this is very important. See, in order to allow the arbitrator to exercise, even if the contract is void or invalid, the courts and the law has evolved in a manner and recognizes a principle known as the principle of separability or severability, meaning thereby that arbitration agreement is separate from the main contract. Therefore, even if the contract is void, the arbitration agreement will stand. And because the arbitration agreement still stands, the arbitral tribunal will have the competence to decide the disputes. That is the primary logic behind bringing this particular concept of principle of separability under the arbitration agreement. Second thing is that supposedly if it so happens that a minor has entered into an arbitration agreement or the parties never entered into arbitration altogether, then there is no arbitration at all. And therefore, even the arbitration agreement being a part of that contract will not have its separate existence, because such a contract will be void ab initio, means void from the very beginning. And therefore, such arbitration agreement will also be invalid. So we have understood the difference between the two. If it is invalid or if it is void as such, arbitrator can still decide this dispute. But if it is void ab initio, then the arbitrator cannot decide and the court will not refer the party to arbitration. That's the difference. Is it recognized under law? Yes, it is recognized. The principle of severability is recognized under the UNCITRAL rules, Article 23.1, under the rule of under Article 16.1 of the UNCITRAL model law. The LCIA rules also recognize it under Article 23, subclause 2. Section 7 of the English Arbitration Act, which few concepts we have borrowed under the Indian Arbitration Act, also recognizes this concept. And ultimately, under the Indian Arbitration Act, it's recognized under Section 16. Now, I'm not going to disturb you with a lot of cases. We will be discussing in the subsequent sessions. Next slide, please. Now, see, I always wonder how delicate the balance is between the two competing concepts. though I won't say that these are competing with each other, but yes, they are different concepts, and still they try to add something to each other. That is autonomy of the parties and safeguards under law. Now, arbitration is an amalgamation of both. Recently, I just came across a judgment that was written by Justice D.Y. Chandrachud. Uh, I think the judgment name is Centropod something. It's a very recent judgment, and the facts were very interesting. The parties agreed for arbitration, which was in two-tier, meaning thereby that they will refer their disputes to a particular arbitral tribunal. Whatever award that comes, any party will have a right to challenge it in form of an appeal before another arbitral tribunal. Now, there is no provision under the Arbitration Act that provides for an appeal to another arbitral tribunal. The only provision that is there is form of section 34, but that is a challenge to the arbitral tribunal. To the court. Section 34 and 37. There's no other provision. Now, the court said, and one of the arguments that was raised before the court was that because there is no scheme for appellate arbitration, therefore such agreement is void. The court said that no, parties' autonomy is something. If the Arbitration Act does not stops you from doing something, merely because it is not provided under the Arbitration Act does not mean that it cannot be done. It can be done. And parties' autonomy is the essence of an arbitration. The agreement to arbitrate, the agreement is the mother of arbitration. And therefore, parties can agree for appellate arbitration procedure. Now, this is interesting because this shows what is the extent of autonomy of the parties. Now, in this context, I will just jot down few provisions of the Arbitration Act 1996, which shows autonomy of the parties as well as, on the same side, provides sufficient safeguards under law. First is the contents of the arbitration agreement. Yes, as you all know, the parties can decide who will be the arbitrators, which rules will be applied, in what time the award should be given. All these can be decided by the parties in the arbitration agreement. They can decide even the venue where the arbitration is to take place. But the arbitration agreements needs to be in writing. So see, a safeguard as well as a parties' autonomy provided under the Arbitration Act. Second reference, parties can waive reference to arbitration. Section 8, it says that supposedly you have entered into an arbitration agreement, but the other side goes in and file a suit. You don't object in the suit that there is a written arbitration agreement, and you don't ask the court to refer the disputes to arbitration. Then at a later point of time, when the suit has progressed, you can't say that no, the matter should be referred to arbitration because I have what do I say? It should be referred to arbitration because there's an arbitration agreement. The court will not then refer the matter to arbitration because you did not object it at the very starting when you submitted your statement of defense, which may be a written statement or any other document which is your substantive defense, which will be doing it tomorrow. But you can see that the parties can even waive reference to arbitration if they want to. But in the same section, if the parties don't waive, then there is no directory powers of the court, or the court does not have a discretion to send the disputes for arbitration or not. It has to compulsorily send it. Then procedure for appointment of arbitrators and qualification. Yes, if you read section 11 and section 12, you will find that the parties can agree for arbitrators. Even a non-lawyer arbitrator or a non-judge can be appointed as an arbitrator. A technical person can be appointed as an arbitrator. The parties have been given so much autonomy. But at the same time, the number of arbitrators cannot be even numbers. That is provided under section 10. And number 2, the arbitrator has to be impartial and independent. That is also provided under section 12. I'm so sorry. Now, then we come to the language of arbitration. The language of arbitration is again autonomy of the party. The party can decide what should be the language of arbitration. The place of arbitration can also be decided by the parties. The conduct as to how the arbitration process has to be done. That can also be decided by the parties. But on the same side, there are sufficient safeguards provided under law. One of it is that the parties be treated equally and given full opportunity to present their respective case. That is a safeguard provided under law. The tribunal must in all cases take into consideration the terms of the contract and trade customs applicable to the transaction. Then, in arbitration other than international commercial arbitration, the tribunal must comply with the substantive law in India. Then, so these all shows that these are certain safeguards. Then another safeguard is that there is a time limit provided for arbitration, which is 12 months, which can be extended by 6 months with the consent of the parties, and thereafter you have to take the permission of the court. So this shows that legislature has provided certain safeguards so that autonomy of parties is curtailed in some sense, and to make the procedure of arbitration stable as well as transparent. Now, next slide, please. Now, yes, I think this is the next to the last slide. So what this particular aspect is that we will be covering in great detail tomorrow when we will be discussing section 7. But for the present being, let's understand what are the 3 applicable laws to a particular dispute. The first is the substantive law. Now let's take an example which is cited above, wherein I have pointed out the arbitration and dispute resolution clause. Now, clause 1 says that the contract will be governed by the law in India. The second says that the proceeding in such arbitration shall be conducted in English language. The venue of arbitration shall be London. The arbitration may award cost, reasonable expenses and all that. And the provisions of Indian Arbitration and Conciliation Act 1996 will apply. What does this mean? This means that the substantive law of the contract that is applicable to the contract as such will be the Indian laws, meaning thereby Indian Contract Act, Specific Relief Act, Sales of Good Act, Partnership Act, all acts will apply. All acts which are Indian laws. Then comes the governing law and lex arbitrii. Now, this is the law that applies to that arbitration agreement. Herein, what is the law? That is Indian Arbitration and Conciliation Act 1996. Third thing says Curial law, procedural law. What does that mean? Now, supposedly, this arbitration was to be conducted by SEAC, which is an institution. It will have its own procedural laws, which they will apply to a particular dispute. Now, these is known as curial law. Now, earlier the judgments were that if substantive law is provided and governing law or lex arbitrii is not provided, that substantive law will become the governing law. But now that's not the situation. The court says that the whole agreement is to be seen in totality to decide what is the seat and venue of arbitration. Now, we will now come to the second aspect. What is a venue and seat? Now, seat is usually a place where the arbitration is to happen and the courts will have a supervisory jurisdiction. But for the sake of convenience, supposedly the clause provides that the seat of arbitration shall be Delhi. But you want the arbitration to be conducted in Bombay because the weather is good there. And there are too many cases now of COVID in Delhi. So you want the arbitration to happen in a place which has less number of cases. And let's not take an example of Pune also. But then you can allow, and then you can have that particular place as your venue. But that won't change your seat. Your seat will be New Delhi because the New Delhi courts will have supervisory jurisdiction. Meaning thereby, you can file your section 34, you can file your section 37 before which court? Which will have supervisory jurisdiction over that dispute. That is why deciding what is the seat of arbitration is so relevant, to decide the supervisory jurisdiction of the court. This will be dealing in great detail in the next slides, in the next session. Next slide, please. Now, this I will tell you in very short detail. It doesn't require too much of consideration because it will be discussed in detail in the subsequent slides, subsequent sessions. Now, there are 4 parts of the whole process. First is pre-arbitration, meaning thereby that you enter into arbitration agreement, submission agreement, arbitration clause. In the same stage, you have the power to ask the court to refer the disputes to arbitration under Section 8 if the other party files a suit. Third is interim relief under Section 9, where you can claim interim relief till the arbitration tribunal is constituted, right? So all these three particular aspects are of pre-arbitration. Then comes commencement of arbitration, which is when does the arbitration commences. Now, if you read closely Section 21 of the Arbitration Act, it provides that the arbitration commences from the date on which the request for arbitration is sent. And therefore, that date is taken as the date of commencement of arbitration. Now, the date has commenced. For example, you send a particular letter invoking the arbitration clause, asking the other side to appoint an arbitrator, or you send your own arbitrator as a name and ask the other party's consent to that particular appointment of arbitrator. If he consents, the arbitrator is appointed. If he doesn't, then you go to the court under Section 11 for appointment of arbitrators. But the date on which that letter is delivered to the respondent, that is the date from which the commencement of arbitration takes place. Then comes the arbitral proceeding. Now, after the arbitration tribunal is constituted, the tribunal starts functioning. That is when the arbitral proceeding starts. You will note some notable powers of the arbitrators. For example, the arbitrators have to have the power to give interim relief. Then statement of claims are filed under Section 23 and 24. Then there are various other sections that are a part of this arbitral proceeding. And the last thing is that the arbitration proceeding concludes with the arbitration award that is provided under Section 31 and 32. The content of the award and the award as such is provided under the respective sections. The last thing is post-arbitration. Supposedly you are not satisfied with the arbitral award that is being passed. Then what is to be done? Then you will have recourse to the courts. And this recourse is provided in a mechanism of a challenge against the arbitral award under Section 34 of the Arbitration Act. Similarly, supposedly your Section 34 is dismissed or no stay is granted under Section 34 and it's going on, and you want to enforce your award, then you will go under Section 35 and 36 that speaks about finality and enforcement of the arbitral award. And the last one is appeal, that is provided under Section 37. Now, as far as Part 2 of the Arbitration Act is concerned, that will be done in the next sessions that we'll be conducting during this 9-day period. Next slide, please. So here we come to the end, to the present discussion and today's lecture. And tomorrow we will be discussing Section 7, Section 6, Section 5, Section 8, as well as few other concepts related to Section 7, which were not explained today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. That was quite an insightful session. So moving to the Q&A session, we have few questions lined up. So I'll take them one by one. So the first question is, what are the main objectives of the Arbitration and Conciliation Act?
That's a good question. So see, Arbitration Act is not something that is passed in the recent times. It has been there for a long time. The 1940 Act, before also, I think it was the 1881 or 1886 Act. So arbitration has been there. Now, as you know, that the courts are overburdened by litigation at all levels, be it the Supreme Court level, High Court level, and in civil courts as well as lower judiciary. Matters are pending for years and years. But international investments that come to India, or investments made even in India, cannot wait for the outcome. If a decision is given after 600 days, 3 years, 10 years, then that government or that country cannot attract more and more investment. And precisely because of this, arbitration is now expanding, taking advantage of these, what do I say, these weaknesses in the legal system, arbitration agreement is blooming in India. And that is precisely the reason I feel that arbitration brings stability, arbitration brings quickness, rapidness in decision-making process, and it is by experts such as technical experts or people who have thorough understanding of a particular aspect of law, and not by judges who I won't use the expression that they are jack of all but king of none, right? So, but still they don't know all the laws, they may not be very familiar, and they take time to understand the concepts, for example in construction contracts. Therefore, such type of weaknesses that were there, arbitration serves a very purposeful purpose. Next, any other question?
Yes, sir. So the next question is, what disputes can be referred to arbitration?
Yeah, so as I have told you earlier that Booz Allen Ayyaswamy case have clearly stated that there are two types of disputes. One is disputes that pertains to right in rem, and second is disputes pertaining to right in personas. Now, basically the concept is that disputes which pertain to right in rem are not referable to arbitration, but disputes which are in personam can be referred to arbitration. So I have given you example also that disputes such as, what do I say? Um, the disputes relating to criminal offenses or matrimonial disputes, right or child custody, guardianship matters, insolvency and winding up matters, testamentary matters, grant of probate, letter of administration, succession certificate, eviction of tenants whose rights are protected under special laws. Such type of disputes cannot be referred to arbitration. Now, to this, other judgments have also added that serious question of fraud, Ayyaswamy case, that serious question of fraud cannot be given and sent to arbitration. Now, what is serious question of fraud? I'll be covering it tomorrow. Any other question?
Sir, there are a few questions. So if the time permits, can I put forth like one or two more questions?
I have no problem if others do.
All right, sir. So the next question is, what grounds are available to challenge the appointment of an arbitrator?
Right. So I think that question we can reserve for later, because we will be discussing that when we will be discussing section 12, 13, 14 of the Arbitration Act. There we will point you out what are the grounds for challenge of the appointment of the arbitrator. That is usually related to impartiality as well as independence of the arbitrator, but we will discuss it at that time.
Sure, sir. So the next question is, which would be the relevant court to entertain a Section 9 application arising out of a foreign seated arbitration proceeding where both the parties to the dispute are Indian entities?
Right. So the concept is that Section 9, so supposedly it's a foreign arbitration, meaning thereby that the seat is outside India. So there's no court that is designated in India. So the courts have held that where the property is situated, that supposedly there is a particular entity whose property is situated there and he's trying to dispose of that property before the arbitration takes place outside. You can file this, you can file the Section 9 there, because Section 9 is not attracted by jurisdiction or seat of the court. It is an interim relief that is to be passed. And therefore, this being an interim relief can be passed by any court where the property is situated. But we will be dealing in quite detail, because there are few aspects of Section 9 which requires jurisdiction as well. If you have provided a seat for arbitration, then the Section 9 is attracted on that particular seat, because this is a foreign award, therefore means foreign arbitration. Therefore, it can be filed in any high court. Where the property is situated, you have to show a nexus. But we will be dealing it in great detail when we will be dealing with Section 9 and Section 17 of the Arbitration Act, that provides for interim relief by court and interim relief by arbitrators in great detail.
Thank you so much, sir. So the next question is whether an objection under Section 8 of the Arbitration Act can be taken without filing an application.
Okay, yeah, there is a recent judgment by Justice Mukta Gupta, very beautiful judgment she has written, wherein she says, now this particular aspect I'll be dealing tomorrow, but I'll tell you because you have asked a question today. she says that it is a duty of the court to refer the parties to an arbitration, even if an oral objection is made by the party. Supposedly, a party has filed a suit, even though there is an arbitration agreement. The other party, meaning thereby the defendant, raises an objection orally on the first date of hearing that this court does not have any jurisdiction. The court, if it sees that there is an arbitration agreement, is bound to refer the dispute to arbitration. Number one. Number two, this particular judgment is based on another judgment by Justice Endlaw. Tomorrow I'll tell you the citation as well as the name. But the judge was Justice Endlaw, wherein he said that you need not to file a specific application under Section 8. You are just required, even if you make a statement or you make a statement in your written statement, it is more than sufficient. But the only catch is that you should make the statement at the earliest possibility when you submit your statement of defense, not at a stage when you are at a later stage. For example, when you have filed a written statement, you have not objected to the suit being progressed, then you can't object it at a later point of time. So that's the only thing provided under Section 8. And I think it's the judgment of Justice Mukta Gupta that says that there is no requirement of an application, and even an oral statement made by a counsel during hearing referring to the arbitration agreement is sufficient.
Thank you so much, sir. So we are running out of time, but I'll just take one last question. There's one participant who's asking, with respect to the point that arbitration clause will stand, even if the agreement is void, except in case of void ab initio. Right. He's asking with respect to the applicability of competence.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I think he is right to ask that question, because the aspect of competence somehow I missed. So let me just tell you this particular thing in a little detail, right? So competence is somewhat should be read along with principle of severability or separability. Now, principle of separability says that the arbitration agreement is separate from an contract. Why is it done? So that the arbitrator can rule on its own jurisdiction, meaning thereby that the arbitrator can then decide the dispute, because if the agreement is gone, then the arbitrator cannot rule on its own jurisdiction. Now, that is one aspect when we connect principle of separability with principle of competence. Competence in generally means that any objection that is raised regarding the arbitration or the jurisdiction of the arbitral tribunal, it is the arbitral tribunal which will have jurisdiction to decide such disputes. Now, if you see the amendments that are made to Section 11, as well as the judgments that are passed by the courts have emphasized on this principle and have stated that courts should refrain and restrain for themselves to decide any matter that relates to the merit of the case under Section 11 proceeding. That is for appointment of arbitrators. They should see only whether there is an existence of the arbitration agreement, meaning thereby that it is not void ab initio, meaning thereby that there was no concluded agreement. The parties at least have to show that there was an agreement, that there was an arbitration agreement. It may be invalid, it may be void, it may relate to a dispute which is time barred. All these things will be decided by the arbitrator, because he has the power to not only decide his own jurisdiction, but also to decide what is the content of the arbitration agreement and the contract. I think I've answered that.
Thank you so much, sir. So before we wrap up for today's session, is there anything else that you would like to add?
Yeah, so tomorrow we will be discussing about Section 7. We will be going in great detail. What is the requirement of Section 7? What is group companies doctrine, composite transactions, and about reference, incorporation by way of reference and reference to the earlier agreement, which we have done today in bits and pieces. Tomorrow we will be doing in great detail. And as pointed out by me earlier, we will be also discussing Section 6 and Section 8 of the Arbitration Act regarding Section 6 regarding reference, by the court of disputes or parties to an arbitration. And that is for tomorrow. So have a good day and see you all tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for such a knowledgeable session. I would also like to thank everyone for being a part of this lecture today. We hope to see you all tomorrow for tomorrow's session. Looking forward to it. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you so much.